Hi, and welcome to the Discovery Collective podcast. My name is Emily, this is Dennis, and together we make the Discovery Collective.
Yes, we do. How are you, Emily?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good, mate. Just living the day to day and getting through all of this.
It's a wild time, hey? I feel like if
Isn't
you
it
ask me
nuts?
the question, it changes day by day. It's like, how are you? And then one day I'm like, I got this. I totally got this. And then another day I'm like, oh no, I don't got this. Like today's a hard day.
Yeah, well, I think you're speaking on behalf of most of the we both are really.
Yeah.
It's a challenging time, but nevertheless, we push on, don't we?
You know, and I was thinking, was going for a walk this morning and thinking about what's needed in this moment in time, you know, where I'm in New South Wales at the moment, we're week 9 maybe of lockdown, and thinking about the conversation that we're going to have today and how I'm so much more interested in conversations about possibility than I am about going in circles around impossibility. I feel like there are so many conversations that are just describing the challenges and the problems that we're in, and that matters and it's important. But I think if we just get caught up in circling around how impossible everything is, it slowly erodes our sense of hope. You know, it slowly erodes our sense of that we're going to get through this, or that there's some kind of other side. So I was really looking forward to this conversation today because I was thinking this is going to be a conversation about possibility. And I feel like these kind of conversations are just so needed at the moment.
I agree, because as you just said, then if we talk about the impossibility, we talk about just the current circumstances, we just get caught in these circles, and again, it's wonderful to have these conversations, and I feel great sense of shelter in this environment with you.
Yeah. So hopefully we can have another interesting and fruitful discussion today, and hopefully it is leading us toward the horizon of possibility. It is about thinking about how do we get our way through this,
yes,
rather than just kind of sinking into it. And we're kind of coming back today to what the Discovery Collective is all about. Like, what is it that we, how do we see the world? How is it that we see the work that we do? And what are these pillars of our work? And why have we chosen the pillars that we have chosen, So I think anyone who's listening to this who is part of an organization or a business or some kind of movement, doesn't need to be about work, it could be about anything in their life, really asking ourselves, what are the pillars of this thing that we're involved in? Like, what are the absolute necessities around, this movement or this business? Do you want to go ahead and describe what they are for us, what we've defined as these pillars?
I'd love to. So I guess, we've spent almost 2 years since we've caught up, since we've met. And Emily and I just met through this random connection. And I was working on leadership-based programs and coaching, and Emily was kind of just thinking of getting out of the whole clinical psychology thing and looking abroad and expanding her horizons. And there was one specific email that I received pretty much around 2 years ago to this week, I would think, where there was just this instant connection. So from then onwards, I think we've been talking a lot about what's needed on an individual, but also on a collective level for success. And so I think a lot of our energy was focused on performance. And it was performance and transformation. So how do you transform and how do you perform? So transform to perform or perform to transform, one of the two. And we've mapped out a really pretty clever transformation process, and which we will still use, but it's the performance thing that's really just changed. So quite recently, we broke down the 3 elements that we feel are most important. And the first is well-being. We talk about leadership and growth. So those are the 3 pillars, I guess, of the Discovery Collective as of late. Would you like to elaborate on those?
Yeah, and I think the most interesting thing,
how they came across.
Yeah, and the most interesting thing in the elaboration of that is the fact that we have substituted performance for growth. And then people might be asking, but performance matters. If we're in a business, if we're in a team, if we're trying to achieve something, then shouldn't we be interested in performance? But I see performance, and I know that you kind of share this view as well, is it's the byproduct.
Correct.
Performance, once we get the ingredients right, performance naturally starts to occur. But if we focus on performance as the thing, the outcome, what we can do is actually derail performance altogether, because we're so interested in outcomes that we lose sight of what the process it takes to get there. And, if we think about anything in life, we think about a wave, for example, like a wave in the ocean. A wave isn't concerned about performing. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be the biggest, best wave in the whole entire ocean, right? What it's interested is going through a natural state of evolution and growth. That's what it's interested in. That's what everything in the world is interested in. And so if we can really support people to go through this experience of growth from a foundation of well-being with this element of leadership, then the byproduct is performance.
Correct. 100%. Well said. And I think, so when we talk about the three elements, and we need prerequisites, don't we? So for us to be in a state of well-being, we need to be safe. Number one. We also need, I guess, willingness, openness, trust. It's a really big one, and trusting in self or trusting in others, because well-being being the foundation of the three, right? So if I'm, and you can't be in a state of well-being if you're actually not safe. You can't be in a state of well-being if you haven't got that level of willingness to do the work that needs to be done. You could be, but to what level? To allow you to.
Perfect example of this, I'm just thinking about, is the Olympics. So there were several athletes in the Olympics that chose not to perform and not to compete. It wasn't just Simone from gymnastics. There was basketball players. There was a whole bunch of different athletes who chose not to compete for mental health reasons. And this exactly exemplifies what you're talking about. You can have the best athlete in the world. They have all of the ingredients to perform, to win, to excel, to break records. But if they're not feeling safe within themselves, and that could be psychologically safe, physically safe, culturally safe, whatever type of safety we're talking about, then that prevents them from even getting to the start line. And I think this is perhaps where a lot of organizations sometimes fall down, is that they assume that safety is present in their organization. So they rock up to the start line of their business and they're just going gung-ho toward the finish line without even assessing whether it's safe for everyone to be there in that moment. And then it's only 100 meters down the track, so to speak, that they're like, oh, something's wrong here. Like, why isn't everyone performing? And then we reverse engineer and we're like, there's a safety issue here. And it doesn't matter how good your team is. It doesn't matter how skilled they are. Without that foundation of safety, everything just falls apart. Do you see this? Like, I guess I'm a psychologist. Obviously, I kind of see this. But like, as an entrepreneur, do you see this as well? Do you see that trend?
Well, now that we talk about it, absolutely. At the time, I felt it. If things weren't quite right, it was difficult to achieve. Like as an organization, I think, and we always, we both look at the individualistic and the collective. But in a team, like you said earlier, if there's one person within that basketball team who's not feeling 100% correct, there's a real, I think, courage for someone to go, hey guys, I can't, I'm not right. So I'm going to step out. This would not have happened 10 years ago. 4 years ago, I just get out there and just do it. And at what detriment to that individual? And so we really got to be, I think we're a lot more aware now. And that comes into that awareness as well. And the mindfulness and how I am feeling and how my I guess, inability or the challenge that I'm currently having, if I am feeling unsafe, how that's going to contribute to my team. But a lot of people have just forged on and kept going, but at what cost? Later on, at what cost is that going to have to the organization? Some organizations perform at all, despite all costs, and the tax of that, the cost of lives and well-being, and that just further holds. I think it just sets you back further and further. Yeah, you might be performing on paper, but how sustainable is that? And this is the next stage. If you want a sustainable kind of achieving organization, you need to have that foundation of safety. I think it's primarily one of the most important things, and it comes in a lot of different ways. And I think it's being able to express yourself in an organization without fear of consequence or status or job, what have you. Because again, that's basically that's the description of psychological safety, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we don't need to have 100% safety. I kind of see what happens at the other end too. Like some people get stuck because they're waiting for the perfect conditions. They're waiting for everything to be 100% safe. And sometimes we do just need to suck it up and get ourselves to the start line. But we need to have a baseline of safety. And that's about safety within our own bodies and in our own minds, but also safety in our relationships, especially a team. Like if you're as a team not feeling safe to ask questions, make mistakes, fail without fear of persecution, then how could you possibly even entertain a growth agenda? How could you even possibly entertain a leadership agenda if people can't feel free to try and fail? And it's the same at a personal level, it's the same as at a relationship level, at an organizational level. We need this fabric of psychological safety to be woven in before we can start.
And when people are new, it's natural to not feel safe, and that's fine. And that's up to the leadership team. That's up to the individuals around the organization to allow that person to feel safe. And some people probably may never actually feel 100% safe due to past trauma, past issues that have occurred in other organizations or other arenas in their lives. But I think I've experienced this firsthand where, my organization was flourishing at a time, but it was coming at a cost because it was going in a direction that we didn't feel. And this is where my partners left the organization because it wasn't what they had signed up for. And I guess it was, it was challenging their relationship as well. So there's a lot of things that were occurring. And when I got out, I spent a lot of time thinking about leadership as well and what makes a business successful. And then coming to these three pillars for me it made a lot of sense, because if there's a sense of well-being, then you can self-lead. As you said, it doesn't have to be 100%. I can still be afraid. I can still be, I can still have some fear within me, but there's a fine line between fear and lack of safety, isn't there?
Totally.
And then when I have that sense of, okay, I feel strong enough today, I feel good enough, I'm just going to go and I'm going to self-lead. And then through self-leadership, I think, and well-being, the byproduct is growth, it's performance, it's achievement, it's, and it's building those foundations and those blocks to allow you to keep going. So I guess those are the three pillars in the relationship between the three, because we talked about the symbiotic relationship between the three. And as a psychologist, where does it, so you've got well-being, how important is leadership at that stage?
Well, I think once you've got well-being, it's like you've got the kindling to start a fire. If you don't have well-being, there's no kindling, and if there's no kindling, there's no fire. Yes, you need a spark, etc. But even if you just have a spark, what are you going to spark if there's nothing there, if there's no foundation? So to me, I feel like well-being is the foundation. And once you've got enough of that, then you can start thinking about, how do we lead toward a shared vision? What does leadership look like? And for me, when I think about leadership and like what it even means, it is about empowering and supporting and guiding a collective toward a common goal or a common vision. Now, what I find really interesting, and this is absolutely the psychology nerd in me, is that collective doesn't need to be a collective of people.
Correct.
That collective can be at an individual level. So, there's this idea that, there's maybe a common misconception I think that we're a single unified homogenous being. Like, I'm Emily. There's just Emily. There's just me. I'm just one kind of self, so to speak. But when we think about what's actually happening psychologically is we're made up of many different parts or many different selves. So even as an individual, I have a collective of selves within me, or a collective of parts within me. And if I don't know how to lead those parts toward my common goals of whatever those happen to be, then I'm going to get really stuck, because the parts that just happen to be present in any given moment are going to hijack the system and take me wherever they want to go. Now, sometimes that's a good thing, but sometimes that can be to my detriment. So I love the parallel here in leadership around talking about leadership of self as well as talking about leadership of others, because both are equally important.
And when I think of leadership, for me, I think, your greatest role as a leader is your power of influence. And if you are in a good place, psychologically, physically, spiritually, mentally, your power of influence will be greater. And as you said earlier about, the multiple elements that make Emily, I've got multiple Dennises. So I've got the social Dennis, I've got the work Dennis, I've got the musician Dennis, I've got the dad, the family Dennis, and all these Dennises need,
Let's not forget the village idiot.
And the village idiot Dennis, well, he's the foundation. He's the guy that learns. He's the guy that teaches Dennis a lot of the things. And it's hilarious. I saw this post, and just talking about, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but I just saw this funny post of Charlie Brown sitting down going, start off with bicycle helmets, then it got to trophies. Kids nowadays, don't, what does it say? They don't get hurt anymore when they do stupid things. Stupid should hurt. And, and I just posted this, and someone I know just put on, helmets, are important. And I went, yeah, listen, absolutely, like 100%. Anything that stops, of course, helmets and seatbelts, and and there's this big thing. I'm like, don't get me wrong, I'm all for helmets, I'm all for seatbelts, I'm all for things that that reduce your likelihood of death, maiming yourself seriously, and brain damage. Trophies, maybe they should be earned, maybe not. Who knows? There'll be a big study on this in the next 20 years. We'll discover that ourselves. But I think stupid should hurt. And my village, coming back to the village idiot, he's taught me a lot of things. And and hurt comes in a lot of different ways. So there's shame, there's regret, there's So for me, all these things are part of that well that creates my resource for well-being. And when I lose that sense of being well, that sense of, when I fall in that sense of urgency, when I fall in that sense of fear, when I fall in that sense of, oh crap, am I doing the right thing? And I'm using all this resource and all this fuel, my well it gets dry, and then I start losing my sense of leadership. I lose my sense of direction, and my growth reduces. My likelihood, my ability to grow, really is impacted. And I've experienced that a lot. But to come back to the village idiot and all the multiple individuals that we are, when I'm not safe, I struggle in that place. However, sometimes it is that thing where you just got to go, hey, suck it up. I just got to go for it here, because the conditions are not going to be perfect.
Right.
And there's a cost of missing that out as well. And when we're talking about growth, it comes in so many different ways, and it's not just success. It's just this little sprout of like, oh, I can do that.
Yeah, I think growth is kind of more like evolution, isn't it? It's like growth is almost like a process more than it is any kind of outcome. Like, it has outcomes attached to it, or there's milestones along the pathway toward growth. But growth is just this kind of infinite process. It just never stops until the thing finalizes, whatever that thing is. Even an organization or a particular dream or goal, like that will maybe come to an endpoint, but there'll always be these constant new iterations of that thing. Everything will continually be evolving. And if we don't learn how to allow growth to happen, like if we don't learn the art of growth, I find that that's where we kind of get in our own way, so to speak. A lot of people say, oh, I'm getting in my own way here, or why can't I just get to that thing? It's because we have stopped our natural evolution of growth in that moment, where maybe controlling too much, or something's amiss here. Or we're not leading ourselves in the way that we need to be leading ourselves.
and or leading others again.
Yeah.
And there's a great responsibility with leadership. And I was thinking about that yesterday, where, you know, a lot of individuals, I got put in a leadership position through default because I did this course, and all of a sudden I was a leader and I was taught how to do all these rescues. But they never taught me how to deal with people, and how to deal with clients, and how to deal with opposition and challenge, and having difficult conversations. And, you know, especially in the rope access world, we talk about, you know, level threes being these, you know, these supervisors, and all you're being taught technically is advanced rescue techniques. So if anyone gets in trouble, you can actually get them out in a safe place. But technically you're running jobs. And I remember the very first job we ran, me and my mates, everything was going crazy. Like we've lost control that whole day. And we just sat down and we had a beer and we went, holy crap, it's more than just rescues. It's about looking after these people, and managing clients and managing expectations.
Totally.
And so then when you said earlier, like, you know, leadership's role is to achieve a certain desired outcome. But the best way to do that is by bringing people on board. So when we talk about influence and persuasion, we talk about fear-based leadership. There's a lot of different ways to attain certain outcomes. And, you know, in North Korea, they get outcomes, but it's a different form of leadership.
Right. Exactly. And I think that that's where, for me, the action that we take as leaders needs to be based on our values. We need to be taking values-based actions. And I feel like leadership for me is very much a doing word. It's not a concept. Action. It's just a series of actions, really, like leadership. And I kind of like the idea that we can lead from anywhere, or that, who was it that said, you know, we can lead from the bench. So we think that there's a basketball game going on, and we think the people on the court are the only ones that have influence over what's happening. When we realize that we can lead from the bench, we're not waiting for somebody else to give us this title. We're not waiting for someone to hand us this piece of paper that says you're now in a position of authority or you're in a position of power. What we're doing is we're saying, no matter where I'm positioned in the world, there is an opportunity for me to be of influence.
Yes.
For me to empower myself and others to move toward a shared goal. And that might just be within your family unit. It might be within your team. You don't need to be the boss in your team in order to be in a leadership position. It's about how we exert our influence in values-based ways toward a shared goal. And I think at this point in time, this is what we need everyone, I guess, to stand up as leaders. I feel like we can't wait for people in authority to just take the reins over where we're going. We need to participate actively, no matter where we are.
And that's where victimhood comes in, you know. So if we can actually find that way ourselves to muster a level of self-leadership and self-awareness, and be, you know, be accountable, have some ownership over our actions instead of the blame thing, the whole, you know. So when it comes to, I really like that passage you just said then, and especially you can lead from the bench and you can lead from anywhere, but everyone needs to have that I guess the I'm trying to think, the permission to be able to take a role or take a leadership role over your little patch on that court.
Totally.
And, you know, again, they say, you know, too many cooks spoil the broth, but in terms of leadership, you know, we kind of need a direction. We need a vision. And this is the foundation again, like as a team, an organization, even as an individual. Where am I going? Do I need to, totally. Do I need to write it on my wall or anything like that? Probably not, because it changes. But where am I going? What am I doing? Am I just going to be walking around, hopefully to stumble upon something? And a lot of us do, and I have a lot of parts of my life. I've just walked around aimlessly, waiting for things to occur. And luckily, some things have, and sometimes they haven't. But when we actually have a bit of a goal or something that we're seeking, it often will happen. More likely than not, then we have to do the actions, obviously, to do that. So this is where, because we talk about the symbiotic relationship between well-being, leadership, and growth, and all three are very important. And, you know, the concept of organizational well-being is something that I'm really fascinated about. So how do you create a sense of well-being within a team, within an organization, within a company?
Yes. Because it's an organism that we're looking at there, isn't it? So like, we think that the organism is only the individual organism, but teams are their own organism. Correct. They're made up of different parts, just like an individual is made up of different parts. And yeah, we need to think about how do we create well-being within that team, within that collective. and we're not, and it's going to be imperfect always. It will never be a perfect formula to create well-being within a complex organization. But we need to constantly be heading in that direction. We need to constantly be course correcting when we realize that there's something that's jeopardizing that organizational kind of sense of well-being. And for me, if the team is empowered to meet the demands in front of them, if the team are empowered to do that, then I feel like they're more likely to experience well-being. And when I say empowered to meet the demands in front of them, I'm not just talking about the tasks that they've got to do that day. I'm talking about the relationship demands. I'm talking about the culture demands, you know, the demands of stress, the demands of change.
Yep.
You know, we need to be resourced in order to meet that. And I feel like when we are resourced, then we experience a sense of well-being.
And there's an element of protectivism as well that occurs when you're in that place. Like, we need to defend, and this is where in organizations and teams, especially when we're together, we've got a collective kind of direction that we're seeking to attain or to achieve or to get to. People start protecting one another, and they protect the vision, and there's something that's really powerful that happens, and I've experienced this a few times, and where everyone is really kind of tapped in to what it is that we're trying to achieve. And then when they know their role, and this is what's really, really, really important for a lot of organizations, where we've got a plan, we're going, and you get paid to do a job, but more than that, what value, again, come back to the values and the things that we hold important. And those are the foundations. Those are, if we look at the tree, we look at the roots, the part of the tree, we don't see them. Okay. These are all the things that we don't see. But they're the most important element, because that feeds the tree, that it rounds the tree. And also the quality of the soil in which the roots are in. And if you've seen this fantastic fungi film that talk about mycelium, how it communicates. So one tree is struggling, it sends the other tree nutrients, and they feed off one another. And there's some really powerful things in that. And but these are all the ground roots. These are all the foundational things that need to be in place for us to even begin to feel well, begin to lead, or begin to actually perform or achieve or to grow.
And then this acknowledgement that we are part of an ecosystem. Like, humanity is just one big ecosystem, and we see trees, like we go out into the bush and we see all of the rainforest, for example, and we see that as something separate to us. Like, this is this beautiful thing we're watching. We don't see ourselves reflected back in the rainforest. And I think this is where we get stuck, because there's not a lot of difference between the foundational or the fundamental ways a natural ecosystem functions and the way humanity functions. It exists in an interconnected web. And we live in these little ecosystems, and unless we are as committed to the collective goals and the collective well-being and the collective survival as we are to our individual survival, we're going to get these really strong individual kind of people or trees, but we're not going to actually get a cohesive, strong environment. And that's, I think, what we really need to be interested in. And if you're in a team and you're not as interested in the functioning of the ecosystem as you are about yourself, things will deteriorate. And it might not happen next month or next year, but it will happen at some point. And trees communicate with one another. They're in communication with one another, just like we are in communication with one another. What I always find so fascinating, and something that I think we don't give enough attention to, is our emotional states are highly contagious. We as human beings, we are highly contagious beings. And I don't just mean we're contagious in terms of viruses, but which is obviously very applicable.
It's very much on topic at the moment.
We are contagious. So my state, my emotional and mental and psychological and spiritual state is something that is so palpable and powerful that it becomes highly contagious to the people around me. And so when we understand that, we can use that for good. But when we don't understand that, we think,
Mm.
well, this is just how I feel, and whatever, everyone else can just sort themselves out. It's like we need to make sure everyone is functioning well so that we can use that contagion for our benefit. And we can see that at the moment, you know, the negativity breeds negativity, fear breeds fear, love
Yep.
breeds love,
Diversity.
connection brings connection. It just, that's how it works.
There's something you said really that really hit me is that the ecosystem, there's strengths in diversity. There's strengths in difference. There's strength. If we're all the same tree, we end up with a tree farm. And eventually the soil won't be strong enough because it doesn't got the shrubs. The shrubs protect that soil that keeps the erosion away. So there's something really powerful in what you just said then. And I thought about that. You know, you've got a team of, you know, basketball players. They're all the same height, the same build. You know, they're great at shooting balls, but they're not good at defending. They're not good at running. Again, it takes that whole diversity of the ecosystem to create a sustainable, ongoing, long game growth. There needs to be appetite, first of all, but it's having that, the diversity for me that creates the strength. There's something really powerful. I've just written that down, you know, like the strength and difference.
Yeah. You know what I find really interesting about difference, like human difference? And so, or diversity, we can think about it as diversity, diversity of ways of being. It is both the thing that connects us and that we enjoy so much about the company of others. We actually crave diversity a lot of the time, because what happens is somebody else's energy fills a gap in us, you know, or somebody else's way of thinking about the world fills a gap in us. But the very diverse thing that we appreciate about others is also the thing that is potentially most triggering to us, depending on what frame of mind we're in. So, you know, so for example, I am not very detail orientated. Very big picture focused. I'm highly abstract. I'm not very practical. That's just my way of being. That's how I was born into this world. And so I seek out people who are really detail orientated and who are very grounding, you know, because they complement me or offer that thing that I don't have. But it's also the thing that irritates me the most, because when I just want to go big picture abstract, I'm like, oh, you're bringing me down with all your detail, right? And so what I find is that we need to have ways of being able to celebrate diversity, you know, in us. Like we can't just, we need that. We need to celebrate us, but also realize when we're being triggered and be able to take a step back.
And you know, and we're both, you know, this is what's really funny, because we're both very similar in that way. How we get anything done is actually quite incredible, but we'll introduce our third partner at some point.
Totally.
The big V has brought us back into a, but no, I'm saying that you've really just recently, you've kind of taken control of all these things.
I know. I'm
right.
learning and cultivating it. Can we just pause this for 1 second? Yep. I'll be back in a sec.
Yeah. 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome back, guys. We had a animal disruption.
We had an intermission.
So and it's happened a few times in our previous podcast, but we decided to carry on now instead of.
I love imperfection.
Well, the spontaneity, right?
I'm really interested in imperfection, and not trying to change the imperfect nature of the world or human existence or conversations or podcasts. It's like, let's just keep going. Let's live in the middle of all of our imperfections. And
that's a really great segue into how, to me, true growth comes into that environment where it's unexpected. It comes in as a spontaneity. It comes in an environment where you've planned something and something completely different has thrown you, and how you deal with that, how you change course, how quickly you can adapt. And this is where, you know, I think we talked about this today, like where we're at now, in this current climate worldwide. There's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of mud that we're trawling through. There's a lot of division. Noise. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of interference, and to be able to lead even just to maintain a certain level of well-being is really challenging at the moment, because there's so much information, there's so much, and and being a super empath, I really struggled. I struggled with what's going on in Afghanistan. Should we have been there? Probably not. But should we have left him the way we have? Probably not. But can I do anything about this? I can limit what I listen and read.
Sure. Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
all. But then I miss out on certain things. So there's this whole kind of, I guess, this challenge that's happening. But to come back on how growth, sometimes our biggest adversaries provide us the greatest opportunity for growth as well.
And I feel like if we look at, like, say, adversity or imperfection or failure or whatever words you want to give to when things don't go right, and we can look at that from a well-being perspective, a leadership perspective, and a growth perspective. So in leadership, in well-being, we need a framework to meet adversity and meet imperfection and meet failure. We need to practice acceptance. We need to practice resilience. We need to practice a positive self-belief in the face of interruptions, interference, imperfections, etc.
Yes.
So that's kind of from a well-being perspective. Then in a leadership perspective, we also need to be able to lead others, empower others and ourselves through adversity that is not an exception to the rule, but the rule itself. Adversity is part of the playground that we're operating in. It's just, you sign up to be a leader, self-leader, leader of others, doesn't matter. You're signing up for adversity. And so you need to be able to navigate that from a leadership perspective. And then growth is about all of these little moments of pausing, stopping, interfering, imperfection, and being able to move your way through it, to continue moving forward despite imperfection, interruption, interference, imperfection. And I think, so when we see these three pillars, we can look at things like interference and imperfection and failure from all of those different levels. And we can look at building skill set for well-being, a skill set for leadership, and a skill set for growth. And I guess that's probably what we're interested in here and what we're doing.
And there's this, and out of those three limbs, let's say, there's multiple branches, there's multiple facets that come out of that. So when we break down well-being, there's a lot that will come from that element. And when you talk about the leadership element, and I think the most important one for me is our ability to adapt. As opposed to react. How do we adapt? So every day is different. Every day is a new lesson. Every day is a new opportunity for me to grow or to regress, and there's strength in that as well. There's learning and regression. There's learning and
sometimes the regression is part of what is facilitating the growth.
Correct.
So sometimes, we think about the way Aboriginal Australians use backburning to facilitate the growth of our natural environment. It's literally regressing, it's literally burning, it's literally taking things down, destroying things in order to move forward. And it's the same for us as individuals and as organizations. Sometimes we need to regress in order to regroup and be able to move forward.
We need winter for spring, right? So these are all the seasons that come through. And I think, but we're always, and the big challenge, I think, for large organizations is maintaining that a level of growth or trajectory of growth that's been, I guess, handed down by shareholders and senior leadership teams. And this is what we're wanting to achieve this year, without a concrete plan, and leaving that in the hands of individuals who know that it may not be sustainable, or attainable. So when placed in an environment where yourself, it's pretty much unachievable, it can have a really negative impact on a team. And I think the first thing that gets taken away is that sense of well-being.
Yeah, and I think the people who are in charge. So if we think about like an organization, for example, there are people who have more authority or have more power, people who are in official leadership positions. They need to have a commitment to all layers. They need a commitment to well-being, they need a commitment to their own leadership, and they need a commitment to growth. And I find that some people some leaders feel more comfortable with growth than they do with well-being. Some
Yes.
leaders feel more comfortable with well-being than they do with growth. And if what happens is their leadership style becomes a bit lopsided, because they've got all of this energy for growth, but they're not attending to well-being, or they've got all of this energy for well-being, but they're not attending to growth. We need to have both so that we have balance and stability, and that we're not favoring one element of that triangle, because otherwise it falls over.
And that's where the balance comes in, right? So having all three. And this is, I guess, and these were the prerequisites, the foundations, because if you have only growth targets, you're setting yourself up for potential failure. You're setting yourself up to unsustainable results that you may achieve it this year and next year, but the cost potentially could be tremendous. You can lose your people, lose your community, and right now there's no better real example than watching a lot of the country leaders currently at the moment and watching where we are, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So how do you lead an environment where well-being is being technically challenged? Like right now we're in a pandemic, so well-being has been probably our biggest challenge right now. So how do we grow? How do we move forward? And how important is that leadership right now?
So important. And I feel like at the moment, leaders should, especially in the face of such uncertainty and everything is so precarious and there's all these challenges, is they need to be possibility orientated.
Yes, beautiful.
They need to be activating hope in others. They need to be they need to be giving people something that they can hold on to. Because I think when we're in an ever-shifting terrain, we get completely destabilized if there's nothing to hold on to, if there's no stable ground. Mm-hmm. And part of the role of the leader is to offer that stability, And so, think about if you're a leader and your organization goes through a really difficult time and you get up there being like, yeah, well, it's all difficult and it's all failing and we've got no idea what's going on. How do you think everyone else is going to feel in that moment? You kind of need to be that lighthouse. You need to be that one who is showing the way, who is being steady, who is offering hope, who's offering guidance. And in order to do that, you need to be leading yourself first and foremost, because if you're not interested in leading yourself, good luck trying to lead others, especially through moments in time like this.
And in times like this, with great leadership comes great responsibility. And as you said, then if you're not leading yourself, how can you lead others?
What are as a way of maybe bringing this down to earth in a really practical way, what would be your top, I'm not going to say tip necessarily, because I don't want to turn this into some kind of formula or like you do this and then everything's going to be okay, but what would be your top piece of insight or wisdom around each of those three pillars? So we think there's well-being, leadership, and growth. And if you think about the way that you have cultivated your journey around well-being, around leadership and growth, are there particular insights that hold true for you around those three areas? Are they different for each of the areas, or are they the same?
I think uniquely that they'd be similar, but I think that they have unique elements for each. So well-being is, for me, is foundational. It's about awareness, awareness of self for me, how I'm feeling about certain things, certain environments, in certain places or certain people. As a team, for me, it was an emotional investment in my team to make sure I knew what made you tick, Emily, what was important for you and what I guess wasn't, and knowing what really makes you tick was really, really important for me as a leader. Because then I wouldn't put you in a place where you were uncomfortable, although I would put you in a slightly uncomfortable position. I'd challenge you. I wouldn't push you. I would challenge you and put you in an environment to watch you. And the byproduct of that was growth, because it was in a safe environment. And I would do that on a gradual basis to build, I guess, your strengths. But I would do that on an individual level and on a collective level as well. So for me, I think well-being takes a lot of awareness. It takes a lot of mindfulness. It takes a lot of cultivating. And again, it's being in that safe space. And there's a lot of care that was involved in that. And I put a lot of energy in that element. the leadership thing starts with me, and I had to be, and sometimes I wasn't in a place where I was well, but I put the mask on for a period of time, because if people saw me really struggling, I think that would have
Yeah.
a massive
Yeah.
impact on the actual team, energy, and their, I guess their vision would be potentially challenged. So I think self-leadership is really, really important. So you need to do the things that you need to do,
Totally.
to be, and sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. It's put the mask on, but you can't carry that mask for prolonged periods of time, because you're always changing masks. You forget who you are. So for me, there was a big element of that, but I think, and growth is just a byproduct of both.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, and foundational, and for you, Emily, when in your rich life experience and everything that you've done, are there anything in particular with each three that you think are essential and important?
I feel like there's a prerequisite that spans over all of them, and that's self-awareness. And
Yep.
if you're thinking of somewhere to start, and you're at the sort of absolute start line around these concepts, I would just say self-awareness will serve you in all three arenas. But I guess on top of that, assuming that people have that level of self-awareness, for well-being, I would say it is a relentless commitment to building the resources internally and externally that you need to be well.
Yes.
We're not assume that well-being is automatically going to happen. It requires an investment. It's like anything. It's like physical health doesn't just magically appear. It's something we're investing in. So I think about well-being almost like creating a bank account, and I'm thinking about every day, let me invest something in that bank account every day, not just on the days I feel like it, but every day I'm making some kind of investment into that well-being, so that when things get really difficult, I have a whole nest egg to draw from. I have a whole set of resources to draw from. So I guess in well-being, I would be thinking about building my resources on a daily basis. Leadership, what I'm really interested in at the moment around leadership is being able to honor the needs of the vision alongside the needs of the individuals who are championing the vision. And I feel like once you can get that balance right of protecting and caring for and honoring the shared goal, and at the same time honoring the individual's needs. So for me, it's that balance I find that is the absolute art. If we're all just about feeding the individuals, we've lost sight of our goal. If we're all about the goal, we've lost sight of the individual. So for me, that's a balancing act. And I think growth, while I feel like it's absolutely a byproduct, I think the biggest skill we can have with growth is surrender. Growth is innately happening. The place where growth gets stuck is when we get in the way of it.
Or we force it.
Or we force it, or we block it. We either force it and forcing it to happen before it's ready, or it's ready to happen and we're standing in its way. So I think with growth, if we can learn to just think about growth like a water in a stream naturally knows where to go. It doesn't need anything. All it does is it just needs free rein to go where it goes within the confines of the river.
Yes.
And growth is the same for an individual organization. So if you can learn to release or relinquish this experience of control and move more like water, I feel like that's when growth for me, it grows exponentially at that point.
And I think that's very, very powerful. And there's two elements that I've just thought of, and I think fun,
extra ones, fun
and love.
Yes.
And that can be expressed in different ways, through care, through different things. But the love of doing what you're doing,
totally.
The love of the journey, despite all the turbulations and all the trials and everything that comes in. But having fun, having a laugh, being able to know I'm the village idiot, to know that village idiot has learned through being stupid, stupid should hurt. But to come back to this whole thing of, being able to enjoy, and that takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of background work. And I said earlier, I had an emotional investment in every one of my teams, every single within my organization. I did my very, very, very best until we got to a certain level where we kind of grew. Then it was important to fuel the leaders. You
Yes.
spend a lot of energy because their influence is it's again for me, it was always influence, and by having them feel part of something really
Mm-hmm.
special, and when you can bring that, and people feel it. You can't act that. You can't pretend. Oh, this is wonderful. It's great. Everybody's like, yeah, great.
Yeah, yeah.
Shit. You've got people coming in, and they, if you don't lie, if you're genuine, you're honest.
Yes.
And there's a fun, you celebrate your victories and you celebrate your losses. You learn from your losses. There's a communication.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk 17 hours on this subject.
And I think once you start opening up, that question around what it takes to honor well-being, leadership and growth, you find that you have a lifetime's work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it goes into all of these different avenues and pathways. And that's the work of being human. To me, the work of being human is learning how to master the art of those three things. And I think that's why we've chosen those three elements, is because once we create mastery around those three things, that all of the things we're seeking, meaning, joy, accomplishment, connection, pride, all of these things we're seeking in life, they start to happen because we've mastered these three pillars, these three key ingredients. I'm feeling like we probably should have said this at the beginning of the podcast.
but again, this is the beauty about the imperfection. This is the beauty. This is the journey of life. It's just basically you don't know. And even as you said earlier about the river, and the water goes where the water needs to go, but also it's being pushed by different, a lot of elements will determine where that water ends up.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's really exciting about this conversation is that this is just the beginning of a whole journey of exploring these concepts and helping other people engage with these ideas in a meaningful, practical way.
Yes.
How can we all work toward well-being, leadership and growth?
And if we miss something, that's anyone out there, if there's something missing, like we spent a lot of time thinking about this, but if you have any recommendations on any other elements that could that we may have missed.
I've always had a dream for a podcast that I came up with, a psychology mate of mine, which was change my mind. That was like the topic of the podcast, and all we would do was try and you have to go into a podcast completely open to somebody changing your mind about something that you inherently believe in, just because I feel like it's probably one of the qualities we're not very good at, especially at the moment, is being able to see things from other people's point of view. So my call out to everyone is feel free to change our mind. If you're like, Emily and Dennis, you have got this wrong. It's not leadership, growth and well-being. It's this. We want to hear about you. We want to hear about your experiences. We want to hear about what your ingredients are. Feel free to challenge us. We're not saying we have some kind of universal truth or this is the formula to happiness or anything like that. This is just two people excavating their experience in the world to try and find things that are meaningful and purposeful to others. And this is kind of where we've arrived. But feel free to challenge us to change our minds.
Yes.
We're fully open to it. Fully 100%. Open.
And that's the whole purpose of the collective. We're stronger together.
Mm-hmm. Stronger together. Awesome, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for staying with us on all of our multiple tangents and eventually getting to something practical. Hopefully that sparked some thought in you, and we'll be here next time for our next podcast about some other wild and crazy thing that has to do with our humanity.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys.
Take care.